My name is Bill Davis. I'm the co-chapter lead of NWSOFA, which stands for Northwest Suburbs Organizing for Action. We're a northwest suburb of Chicago, commonly referred to as the land beyond O'Hare. We're an indivisible chapter. We have 5,200 members, and we have 25 volunteer leads that handle 10 issue teams for us. Those issue leads will prepare a meeting every month, sometimes twice a month, depending on the news and activity that goes on. Tonight, we have Karl Faulstich and David Doney, who are the co-leads for our fiscal and economic group. Fiscal and economic our group has been presenting monthly for a little over 10 years now. David and Karl as a team have been doing it for around 8 years, maybe 9, and they really have got it down pat. With that, I'll turn it over to Karl and David.
Welcome, everybody. I apologize I'm joining by phone because I don't have a computer to work on here in Charlotte, but I've got my phone and I've got copies of the slides, so I'll look at it that way. Basically, we want to give you the facts so you can sharpen your arguments and communicate to your audience, whether that's commenting on articles, commenting on Facebook, X/Twitter, or what have you. And for some reason, I'm not getting to see slide 3 on my phone. Okay, anyhow.
I can cover it, Karl, if you'd like, but while your phone may catch up there.
Yeah, why don't you do that?
All right. So we've got the usual labor market update that you typically see, but then for special topics, we're going to do a Biden versus Trump on the economy. So we're going to go head to head and compare how the economy's done under both those two presidents. We will also go through the CBO's budget and economic outlook. It's their big annual report that they do, and it pulls together a lot of pieces about the economy. There was a blockbuster item in there on immigration, and so we will do a deep dive on immigration and the economic impact of immigrants. What we're not doing in this session are some of our typical economic updates about inflation and wages and some other pieces that we typically get into. Those have not dramatically changed from the last couple of months. Wages have still outgrown inflation. Inflation is still pretty slow, although it's not dead yet. It's still going on, and we'll cover a little bit of that. So that's where we're headed tonight. Okay, so job creation, probably the most important economic variable. The history right before the pandemic, February of 2020, we had 152 million people working, and then 22 million jobs evaporated in the pandemic. We recovered by July of 2022, actually June of 2022. And then we're now at 157.8 million jobs. That's a record. We've been setting records every month now since June of 2022. The job creation rate is about 273,000 a month since we regained that pre-pandemic peak, which is a very rapid rate of job creation. And we're in generally Biden, since the start of his administration, is up almost 15 million jobs, which is a 402,000 a month rate. I like that 273 number better because it takes away sort of this very steep incline here as we climbed out of the pandemic. Regardless of how you look at the time frame, job creation is very fast under Biden. 3 months. This is the 3-month rolling average calculation, so that line is an average of 3 months of job creation. And you can see that it's around 289,000 or 265,000. It fell from 289,000 in the last period in terms of 3-month rolling average. So it came down quite a bit because we had some monthly adjustments. Some of the prior months were reduced significantly, but 265,000 is still a very rapid rate of job creation. For the unemployment rate, it's 3.9%, up a little bit, up 0.2% versus the prior month. And the U6 rate, which is a wider number that you don't hear as much in the press, it was at 7.3%. That's about +1 versus the prior month. So the unemployment rate ticked up a little bit in the last month, but they're way down from when Biden started and just a little bit above where they were before. So the unemployment rate is very low. We'll get a little bit more history of that when we get into the Trump versus Biden comparison. We'll be doing some annual comparisons. So the household survey results were negative this month for the most part. Most of these numbers got worse from prior month. So the population got bigger, the labor force got bigger, but we also had more unemployed and fewer employed. The employment to population ratio fell slightly. That's for the wider population, age 16 plus. We'll give you the prime age 25 to 54 in just a minute. So still a very low unemployment rate at that 3.9 rate, but just people are starting to see the labor market slow down a little bit. So this wasn't a particularly great report from a household survey perspective, but the job side of it was still pretty solid. When you look at part-time jobs or government jobs or multiple job holders as a share of the people that are working, so each of these is a percentage. That left axis is a percentage. They were all lower. So in January 2024, for example, the percent of part-time workers was lower than February 2020. The percent of government workers was lower than February of 2020. And the multiple job holders was basically the same. There's been a lot of misinformation from Republicans around you can't trust these job numbers, they're all part-time, or you can't, they're all government jobs, or people have to work 3 jobs to make a living. All that's false. And that's what this slide shows you, is that these job numbers are very robust. You know, it's more full-time people, it's fewer government people, and it's just people just running like they used to with their regular one full-time job. The employment to population ratio for the 25 to 54-year-olds is at 80.7%. It went up actually a little bit last month, and it's still above the pre-pandemic. It's just above that 80.5% level that it was right before the pandemic. So very strong reading on the employment to population ratio. Sometimes Republicans will attack the unemployment rate, saying, you know, but look at the labor force participation, or look at the employment to population ratio for age 16 or up. Those numbers are demographically going to be falling over time because the country is aging. You eliminate that effect by using the 25 to 54-year-olds. You get a fair reading of what's going on with the vast majority of people that are working, and the answer there is very good, stronger than 2020 before the pandemic. And again, I use that February 2020 number because that was the last pre-pandemic month. Wasn't affected by the pandemic yet. You would also use the fourth quarter of 2019 or 2019 for the year when you're doing comparisons pre-pandemic, which is the right way to look at things, because when you're in these giant drops in 2020 and 2021, like in the jobs and other things, they're very bad distortions to the economy, and you can't get a good reading when you're using those as your base period. The main thing on here is the red dotted line. That is the job opportunity ratio, or the number of job openings per unemployed person. So it's an indication of how easy it is to get a job. And that peaked at 2% during the Biden era. Look at the right side axis where it says ratio over here, and that ratio has been coming down. So it's still better than the pre-pandemic, but the Fed actually would like it to come down. They want the economy to be slowing a little bit to take some inflationary pressure off. So good news for the Fed, bad news for workers. We like to see this number as high as we can get it, knowing that there's a lot of opportunity out there for people to find jobs. And the job openings and the unemployment rate, the job openings were about 8.9 million. Now I'm looking at the left axis over here. So 12,000 would be 12 million. And right here, we're at about 9 million job openings and about 6 million unemployed. And these numbers always lag by a month. So this is January. These are January numbers for the job openings. The unemployment level, we actually have that. I shared that earlier as a current. We get that one up to the latest February number. So any questions on the labor market? And let's take a look at the chat if we got anything in there.
Nothing yet that I can tell.
I'm seeing some environmental related stuff, so let me hold that through the end. I will hang on to that one for the end of this discussion. All right, so going into the Biden versus Trump sort of head to head, this is the job creation that's average for the year. So in 2023, we had 251,000 jobs on average created per month. And remember that we were already in record territory after June of 2022. So all of these are on a record level. So it's fair to compare that to the pre-pandemic period, whereas you're kind of in a tough spot if you're trying to say that 2021 is a fair comparison against the pre-pandemic era, because we were coming out of that big, loss of 22 million jobs. It doesn't matter though. Job creation under Biden, even in 2023, was about 50% faster than 2019. 251 divided by 166, it's around 50%, maybe a little higher. So very good job creation. Biden, any year though, you look at for Biden, compares favorably to Trump, even pre-pandemic. And in fact, Obama's second term, I've only got 2016 on here, but if you were to look at Obama's second term, his job creation was faster than Trump's. Trump average pre-pandemic around 180, whereas Obama was, I think, around 220, if I remember. Karl could correct me there. I think he was 220 or 230. So great story here in terms of faster job creation under Biden than Trump. Any way you look at it, slice it any way you want, doesn't matter. In terms of the unemployment rate, the last 2 years, we've had annual average again, 3.6% unemployment, which is amazing that it's been this low for this long. You have to go back to 1969 for a 3.5% year. Trump's best was in 2019 was 3.7, also extremely low unemployment. Historically, unemployment average is about 5.7. Biden here, and I'll share a slide in a minute on this, his unemployment rate is the lowest of any president on average since LBJ, and he's not far behind LBJ. He's just above LBJ. A few more months, if we get another run down in the unemployment rate, he should catch LBJ in 2024 if we're lucky. If we're not lucky, he won't. What else do I have over here in the stats? Let's see if it's in here. The unemployment rate was 4% or above from February 1970 to March 2000. So for almost 30 years, we never got below 4% unemployment. That's how remarkable 3.6 is. It's amazing, and it's part of why when we get into the wages have grown so quickly, because there are not a whole lot of workers for those jobs. That's why we got all those job openings above the number of unemployed. And if you break this out by race, so the unemployment rate for the race, and this comes from Stephen Ratner on Twitter. He's also the Morning Joe chart guy. He does great stuff. If you're not following him on Twitter and you like charts, you should be following this man. He does just a superb job with charts. And these show that for any race, the numbers are much better under Biden, whether you include 2020 and 2021 or whether you exclude them. It's still better under Biden for all the races. And with the exception of Asian here in the 20 to 21 where they're excluded, everybody it's always quite a bit better under Biden. So that's good news there. When it comes to real wages, this is one of the areas that has been very badly reported in the media. And people are often surprised when they see this chart in the way that Karl and I describe it. But it's an extremely important chart, and it's worth dwelling on and understanding it. The short version is that real wages, so inflation adjusted wages, purchasing power, is up in 2023 relative to 2019. These are annual averages. And so about $1, not quite $1 per hour translates to about $1,000 more purchasing power for a typical. What's been happening is, until recently, this run up here where the numbers are increasing since mid 2022, the media was often reporting that real wages were down under Biden and that inflation was really biting into purchasing power of people. They were just looking at this negative trend here. And what happened is this number is it's a phony number. Millions of lower wage workers lost their jobs disproportionately in the pandemic, and that made the average of those working jump. And so this was widely reported by economists, but the media, for whatever reason, wanted to stay on the inflation as a crisis narrative. And they said, oh no, real wages are down. So just look at the chart. At no time were real wages lower than 2019. The lowest point here in the middle of 2022 is still higher than 2019. So that narrative of people are suffering terribly from inflation was never, there's always going to be somebody suffering in the economy. But in terms of the averages, and this is the non supervisory employees, so the bottom 80% of the workforce, not the higher paid managers that can handle inflation in stride pretty easily. This is the lower 80%, a good proxy for the middle class doing just fine in terms of their wages. When you look at this graph shows the dollars per hour that I was just showing and also the unemployment rate. And so you want to have a low unemployment rate and high wages. And these are presidential averages. So Biden is the champ right now in the furthest upper left corner. He's got the highest real wages of any president, and he's just behind LBJ in terms of the average unemployment rate. And it's very close, like 4.0 and 4.2 or something like that. It's just a slight 4.1 and 4.2. It's very close. So you can see a couple of these may surprise you. Ronald Reagan, the guy looked at as the economic Superman, was down here in one of the worst for his presidency. Obama not far from him, and Bush 41 also in the tank. Because what you had, and I don't have the chart in this presentation, but real wages were very high in the 1970s. They fell consistently all the way until the mid 90s, and since then they've been trending up, sort of a big bowl shape or a shallow U shape. And right now we're right at the top. We have extremely high real wages. That is purchasing power. That's again, despite inflation, people are in great shape from a wage perspective. In terms of the growth, real GDP, so again, real means inflation adjusted. Biden and Trump pre-pandemic are exactly tied at 2.84% as of the fourth quarter of 2023. If you use Trump's full term, it's 2%. And then Obama's first and second term are indicated on here for comparison purposes. Better than Trump overall, not as good as Trump pre-pandemic. Real net worth per household has really jumped since 2019. It peaked in 2022. So 2022 was actually when Americans became the richest ever. That's under so a very large increase driven by mainly housing for the bottom 50% group there on the left, and housing and stock on the right hand side for that 50th to 90th percentile group. As you may know, the used to be that only about half the people own stock, and it's been expanding a little bit. It's more like 60% now own stock. So there's just a very little bit of that in the bottom 50%. This group is mainly the increase was from housing and then also consumer durables, which are the things that last. And I think cars are included in consumer durables, but if not, it's the appliances and all the stuff you have around your home. So very big increase in this. These numbers are lagged a little bit. So this is the third quarter of 2023. As of this weekend, we did not have the Q 423 numbers. It's really difficult to find when they're going to release them. I thought it would be in March, but it looks like May. The AIs that I've been consulting, the artificial intelligences I've been asking are struggling with when it's going to get reported. So we'll see. But it's a really positive story, and you can almost be guaranteed that in Q4, because the stock market went up dramatically, that at least for this 50th to 90th group, this number will be back up toward that record level again. Now, this chart shows the stock market, and sort of as I like to think of it as the racetrack diagram. So the bottom is how many days, trading days in office. So I'm superimposing essentially the timelines of the two presidents, superimposing the stock market trend, the cumulative gain at a point in time. So for example, right here at the end of this blue line, Biden is up about 50%. This is from election. And he's actually taken the lead from Trump because Trump is going into this giant pandemic drop that you see here. And it's probably going to be the next 100 trading days or so before Trump is really likely to catch Biden, barring some big drop for Biden. He's going to be in the lead for a while. And in fact, you can see Trump goes almost back to where he started. He's going to have almost no cumulative gain, 5% cumulative gain at, April of his fourth year for Trump. And so Biden's going to be ahead for a little while. And so there's some background here on that. But clearly, Trump cut corporate taxes, which helped him. He had this pandemic, obviously, which didn't help him, although he got out of that pretty quickly. The economy bounced back, the stock market bounced back really fast. But also, Biden has faced much higher interest rates. He's facing 5% interest rates, whereas Trump is not. So, there are things that are headwinds and tailwinds for each person, but generally, right now, the story is good. Even if it's close, even if Biden and Trump are close in this general area where Trump was in the lead for a while, the stock market is about 50% higher than it was in 2019. So your 401k, if you own an index fund, you are styling because your stock is way, way up. All right. Now, when we turn to deficits and debt, the question is always which president added more to the deficit or debt. And I don't particularly love this measure. It's just one way of looking at it. I like other measures better, but I like these charts, so I'm going to share this one. The Biden policies are estimated to have added 4.5 trillion to the deficit or debt over the course of a decade. And so the rescue plan was the big one. That's the March 2021. Those are the checks in the pockets and all that. These are some other spending bills that are in here. Then you got infrastructure, something for veterans, the PACT Act, some other minor ones. The Chips and Science Act didn't have a big budgetary impact. Ukraine supplementals, a very tiny portion of what the government spends. Despite Republicans trying to block it, it's not that much money. The student debt relief, this chart was from before the Supreme Court blocked this. So this red thing goes away, most of it, about 300 billion of the 400 goes away. So I've got the number. If you go 4.8, you take out the 300, that gives you a 4.5 trillion number. So remember that number, 4.5 trillion or so under Biden. Trump is at 8.4 trillion, so about 3 trillion more. That was the big CARES Act, was his big pandemic relief act. There was, I think it was the December 2020 act right before Biden started. I think that was this one, maybe another one here. It could be one of the others. Apologize, but there was another relief act right at the last minute at the end of the Trump era. Of course, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, a couple $1 trillion there, and a few other just some of these big budget bills that they sort of slide in to fund the government that they always seem to be adding to. That's that. And there were some other pieces here at the top. So Biden 4.5, Trump 8.4 on this measure. There are other ways to go about measuring it, but I think this is about as good one as you're going to get. When you compare 2023 or 2022 to 2019, so this is Trump at his best. This is his best year, 2019. These are the numbers, and they're adjusted for inflation where applicable. So that means, real. And so we've covered a lot of these numbers already, but I just want to summarize them here. You can see the unemployment rate better, the job creation rate better. And I say better, I mean better than 2019 in both years, better in both years, better in 1 year. And 2022, we were just a hair below 2019, 10th of a point. Better both years for the real wages, better both years for the net worth for the bottom 50%, same for the 50th to 90th. Hopefully you're seeing a pattern here, people. The stock market way higher than 2019. And then the uninsured much lower. In fact, the uninsured has been falling like crazy under Biden. Initially, Trump was doing a lot of sabotage of the uninsured. He was sabotaging the Affordable Care Act and making it harder to get covered. But then toward the end with the CARES Act and others, we got some relief, some reversals of that, got some more people covered. So actually Trump ended up, not as bad as he was, but we've really had a major decline in the uninsured under Biden, which is fantastic. The only big measure that I've seen that was better in 2019 was the poverty rate was slightly better. Biden's poverty rate overall was a little bit more. It was more like 2017 and 2018. 2019 was the lowest poverty rate ever that we've recorded. And that's the unadjusted rate. As you know, there was the child tax credit, which brought that child poverty rate way, way down under Biden, and then it reversed. So the overall rate is a little bit higher, but still very low historically. The other one, we don't know the answer to this yet, but for 2023, but the real median household income, which is an important measure of how households are doing, it was higher in 2019 than 2022. We had a very large increase in the number of households in 2022, which brought that number down. I'm curious to see what happens in 2023. We won't get that data until September. It's very lagged. About one of the most lagged key numbers that we have is that almost 9 months for the 2023 number, but it should be, I'm thinking it'll be better than 2022. But still, almost all the major numbers better in 2022 and 2023. And the media has only been really recently been reporting a lot more positive news. That they were very negative on the Biden economy for a long time, in part because they kept harping on the real wages going down, which was a real shame. They did a real disservice to the country with that, because the news was out there for a long time that those numbers were distorted in 2020 and 2021, and they should have been suspect anyway, because when you look at the job numbers, you can see how distorted they are. Using 2020 and 2021 as your base period is a just really bad analysis, and I think with the media, it was deliberately so they could sell more, get more eyeballs, sell more papers with another crisis, an inflation crisis. I always call this. Yep,
David, and we do have 3 questions. Do you want to take them now or
yeah,
at
let's
a
take a look.
breakdown?
Let's see what they've got here. Is housing asset worth inflated, giving a false increase, maybe a balloon? I don't know. I wish I had an answer there for you. With mortgage rates high, people are not wanting to sell because they would have to refinance. And so there isn't a lot of supply. And so, given a certain level of demand, let's assume that makes sense that pricing levels would be high. And if mortgage rates were to fall way down, then and more that there would be more supply in the market, the price of the housing would probably come down. That said, keep this in mind, theoretically asset prices and interest rates move in opposite directions. So if interest rates and mortgage rates were to fall from 5, well, the mortgage rates are more like 8, but the interest rate the Fed sets is more like 5. As those rates fall, you would expect to see prices go up. So I think you'll have 2 directions of pressure there, right? You're going to have the interest rates going down, which is going to want to raise the prices. So prices are being artificially held down by those high interest rates. But at the same time, once the mortgage rates fall, you're going to see a lot more supply come into the market, and that will be something that would lower housing prices. So I don't know where that's going to play out. I just don't know where that's going to answer. But you do have those 2 directions, and it's just going to be, we'll have to see what happens. I don't think it's a bubble, just because I think interest rates are high, and there's going to be a lot of room to go up if interest rates fall. The middle line on the real net worth graphic is very wide. The middle line and the real net worth graphics is very wide. Hard to tell who's watched the stuff in the middle is. Somebody want to clarify that for me? You can come off mute and tell me.
Yeah, this was several slides back where it was showing Trump and Biden in it. And I go back. Yep, there, that one.
Uh-huh.
The line's really wide and trying to figure out under whose watch the part in the wide band.
Oh, okay. Yeah, sure. All right. So that line right there is the recession line. That's when whenever you see these gray shaded lines vertically on a Fred chart, they are recessions. That is that is not intuitive. So I'm just letting you know that's what that means. I'm glad you asked the question. So if we look at this thing, 2020 to 2021, Biden is going to start, if you drew a line up from 2021 to here,
yeah,
that's when he starts. And so he has not had a lot of movement from when he starts to here.
Okay.
Right? It's not that big a jump. It's a little bit, but it's not a lot. And then here, I think it's actually going to be slightly down 2021, where it's going to be a little lower.
Okay, that makes better sense. And I'm sorry, I didn't look closely enough at the numbers.
No, those are good points to make, because you can't necessarily argue that the stock market and the housing prices were badly distorted. Well, you can argue they're not distorted down, let's say, by the economy, meaning it's not a crazy thing to compare 2021 on this particular measure to 2023. I think it is crazy to do that with like real wages. Comparing to this is crazy because of this distortion here. And likewise, if you are looking at like, because of, let me go all the way to the front here. Because of this giant dip, if you're using these as your starting points, these actually make Biden look better if you use these as starting points, right? So I'm just being consistent, but you're correct in that if you look at that particular measure, you could use 2021 Biden's start date as a legitimate starting point for comparison. I wouldn't do it for other measures beside this one that we've been using.
Okay. I like how you're comparing 2019 to 2023 in most things, because even though it's not perfect, at least it's the third year of each term.
Yeah, I mean, it's Trump's best year, so we're not punishing him for 2020. This number is an unusual one where it actually acted as if there was no pandemic, right? It just kind of kept on going. And, you know, in Biden's it was his first year from election. So November to November, Biden set the record for the most stock market gain in that window of time at 37%. Bloomberg did an article on it. So Biden sort of front loaded his big gains, and the big gains started in November. Karl and I say this a lot, is that Trump began to take credit for the stock market at his election, because there was a nice run right after Trump was elected. As you might imagine, corporations were thrilled at the idea of the big tax cuts. And so the market went zooming, and they also zoomed under Biden because they knew Biden was going to take aggressive action to boost the economy. He was saying, I'm going to do the Rescue Act. I'm going to make sure we don't have a recession, that we get our employment back. So Biden had a really excellent run there right at the beginning. It's sort of front loaded. So all those factored in. Great question. I'm glad you asked it. This is, it's fair point. Trump used to take credit for the stock market every day. Why don't Dems do the same? I wish the Dems had a better marketing department. Karl and I do our best, but we're just two guys out in the wilderness. You know, we don't control the Democrats' site, and they occasionally will do some pretty great economic graphics, but I think a lot of the time they don't. And I wish they had a pro economist on the team that was just cranking out great charts for them. And you know who's been doing it free of charge for them has been the guy I mentioned, Stephen Ratner has been acting like the unofficial Democrat chart guy, because all the charts on the economies tell a really good story, almost all of them for Biden. And if you follow him on Twitter, you're going to see a collection of just beautiful slides that he does. And I've got most of his content covered here. It looks different, but I use him for ideas. I follow him when he has a good chart. I make sure we get it in here. Usually I use the Fred stuff, but he's saying a lot of the same things we're saying. I comment on Stephen Ratner stuff. He's seen my charts, I guarantee it. So he knows, he's seen these charts, and Karl helps me make them better, because he will say, Dave, you should do this or do that or show it this way. And so, the world sees our stuff. It's just a question of, are they going to get better at, make it prettier like this? I can't create a chart this nice. I don't even know how he does it. He says created with data wrapper. He must have a software that allows him to do these kind of cool dot things next to each other. Excel doesn't do that. All right, so let's see. To your point, I think we should take credit for whatever good measure we have and just say it constantly. Trump used to say it's the greatest economy ever. He used to say it all the time. Democrats are a little shy we're always upset about offending someone, saying the economy is great when it's not great for 10% of the people. Well, are you going to lose power because you're not willing to sell? I would err on the side of selling. I think Trump actually you can beat up on him he's got a lot of flaws, but Trump is a heck of a marketer. And there's something to be learned from that. Let's see, analysis of the post. Oh, somebody, analysis of post-pandemic outcomes on household wealth. Pew, thank you. Pardon me. Somebody shared a link there, and there are if you look for them, you can do a search on Google. If you ask for Trump versus Biden charts, you're going to see a bunch of articles come up now. And Post did it. The New York Times, I haven't seen theirs yet. If they did it, it's hidden. But the Washington Post probably did the best one. There's a good one on Vox that Ed had shared. So Vox and Washington Post, I recommend going there for kind of the analysis that Karl and I are sharing here today.
I think that's
okay. Cool. Thank you for stopping me. Oh, let me go back to the bottom where we are. So I think this is we call it Bill's favorite chart. He likes having all these nice, easy to read bars right next to each other. And so these are some of the same data you've already seen, just presented like this, easy enough to cut and paste this thing and share it on social media. I've shared this chart like it's probably 1,000 times. People that follow me on Twitter must be sick of this thing. I put it everywhere. And I do a version without 2022, just a 2023 only as well. This is another way of looking at it. Cumulative increases from the fourth quarter of 2019. So even though a couple of these measures are monthly, I'm using quarterly averages. So Q4 19 to Q4 23. These are the percent increases. These are not real, meaning these are just nominal, unadjusted for inflation, because I've got inflation down here. Inflation since the fourth quarter of 2019 through the fourth quarter of 23. And a couple of these items only are through the third quarter. The net worth is only through the third quarter because that's the latest we have. Inflation 19, but hourly wages plus 24, home prices plus 28, net worth plus 40 for the 50th group, stock market up 45, net worth of the bottom 50 up 87. So all of these sort of household wealth type measures, the wages, the net worth, the price, housing, the stocks, all that way above inflation. So even though the wages are just barely above inflation, the rest of them are way above if you go back to that fourth quarter of 19. Now, home prices rising is not a good thing. All right, that's a fair point. Now let's talk about that. Housing, and this is from the chat. About 66% of people of households own the home they live in. I would rather live in a $200,000 house than a $150,000 house, especially if I bought it. Now, some people will say that doesn't help me because I just have to pay higher property taxes. I can't benefit from that large increase in my home value, but that's not entirely true because you can extract a little equity from it if you choose to do that. Also, your kids will thank you if you give them the house when you pass. But I can understand why people would say you want housing to be more affordable for people, especially young people. One of the shocking statistics that surprised me, because there's been so much negative news about housing affordability, home ownership rates were higher in the fourth quarter of 2023 than they were in the fourth quarter of 2019 for every age group, all the young groups. It was like the middle age group, like 45 to 54 or something in the census analysis that was worse. And we covered this slide in the last meeting. I don't have it here. So I would say, despite all the affordability, another media crisis, the share of home ownership is better at almost every age group, and it's better overall at the fourth quarter of 2019, the fourth quarter of 2023 than the fourth quarter of 2019. Like everything else, better under Biden. So now let's see, are these metrics median or average? Now, in terms of the second part of the question or comment, we need to build more affordable houses. Absolutely. And in a lot of urban areas, there are restrictions on building housing that they shouldn't have. People are protecting their home prices. Relatively wealthy people don't want lots more houses built around them. But what you see in the southern states that are sort of sprawling, you're seeing lots and lots of housing being built in those states, lots of people moving to those states, and you're seeing much more affordable housing in those mostly red states, places where boomers retire. You get some more affordable housing. So I totally agree with the second part, build more affordable housing, but understand that having a home price that's up more than inflation is a good thing from that perspective.
We had so much fun when home prices crashed about 15 years ago.
Yeah, well, yeah, we don't want to repeat that one again. That's why that question on the bubble was, is there a housing bubble, is an important one, because, are we going to have something like that? I need to dig into some of the data specifically on mortgage debt as a relative to the size of the economy, but my understanding is it's not particularly high like it was back in 2008 when you had an incredibly high level of debt on the homeowners as a share of the economy. It's not as high because homeowners deleveraged and they have continued doing that. So I'll look at that, though. I'll take that as a note for the next meeting to look at that mortgage debt relative to the size of the economy. Now, Reagan famously went to re-election very easily with his Morning in America ad, one of the best ads ever, according to the people that rate these things. And Karl let me know that, the Reagan ad was in the middle of 84, so we probably should have used 83 data here. But bear with me on the 84 data, which is going to be relatively close, I would assume. You had actually very good job creation in 1984, coming out of a recession, of course. So it boosted a little bit, so a little bit better than Biden. But unemployment rate was way higher. The inflation rate a little higher. The mortgage rate way higher. Oh, you know what? Twice as high? Yeah, a little more. The hourly wages I shared earlier, Reagan was not that great on hourly wages. He was one of the worst presidents for hourly wages in terms of the real inflation adjusted one. I mean, Biden here almost what, $4 an hour higher? So 4,000 a year more purchasing power roughly for workers today. Real median.
2,000 hours a year. 2,000 hours a year.
Okay, all right, sure. Median household income way higher under Biden, and the Michigan Index of Consumer Sentiment, which we've talked about a few times in our meetings, way higher under Reagan. And Biden has just gotten these terrible sentiment scores, no matter how good the economy is, whether it's people hating inflation or just hating this post-pandemic era when they're still nervous about it, or whatever the issue is that they don't like. The sentiment has been more like the Great Recession than it is a 3.5%, 3.6% unemployment rate, rapid job creation, great job opportunity. Americans becoming the richest ever in 2022. That just didn't seem to register. And even with Biden's the word getting out now and economic sentiment starting to improve, it's slow to appear in the polls. It's slow to appear in his popularity. So again, the Democratic marketing team has a lot of work to do, but they've got a lot of good information that they can share and explain to people.
David, do you have some more questions that have popped in?
Are those metrics median or average? And it depends on the metric we've talked about. Like with this Reagan one right here, that's a real median household income. Let's go back to that slide that compares the numbers, and let's see. The first two, the average idea doesn't necessarily matter with those two. With the third one, real GDP, average versus median. And think of it this way, and I think Karl always explains it well when he says Bill Gates walks into a room, the average net worth in the room is going to jump tremendously, but the median net worth may not move at all. You go from, if it's a room full of 11 people, you go from the fifth person to the sixth richest person. That's the median. Half of the people are above, half are below, so it's not distorted by those giant, by a single large outlier in there. And so you want to use median data when it's available to you. So the real GDP per capita, that's an average. Employment to population ratio doesn't really matter. The real wage production and non-supervisory workers, it's an average, but it's an average of the bottom 80% of the workers. So you're not going to see the large distortions. It's not that far off the median. So it's not quite a median, but it's not quite as bad as an average on distortion. These two are definitely averages, but they are for groups. Bottom 50% group, 50th to 90th group. So you don't have, the super rich distorting those numbers at all. And then the stock market and the uninsured, I wouldn't even look at those as averages. I mean, that doesn't really apply there. So it just depends on the measure. When we use this Reagan comparison, the real median household income is a true median. And again, real adjusted for inflation, much higher under Biden. All right. Let me pause there. Let me see if there are other questions. Sorry, reading some of the latest ones here. I think that there is this concern about large corporations buying housing. And however, at least as far as I can tell from the media, it's something that it's not something that affects sort of the national numbers in a big way. And I could be wrong there, but I just haven't seen it. I have seen it, though, affecting particular geographic areas where they buy up a lot of housing. I think might even be in North or South Carolina, where there's one company that bought up like an entire county practically. It's like they bought up a ton of houses in a particular area. And so I'm sure that raised, I don't think it's a good idea that large corporations own housing. I just don't. I think housing should be a more individual and small business thing. But I don't have data that shows that it's driving up prices significantly. If anybody does, please share the link, and we'll make sure to look at it a little more closely and and cover it in an upcoming meeting. And yes, anytime you have a supply constraint or a lack of housing, there's an estimate here of 3.2 million. Again, you're welcome to share that link. Yes, anything constraining the supply of housing is going to raise the prices. Again, though, interest rates are unusually high. There's going to be an offset when those interest rates fall. And then cutting home building dramatically after the crisis. Thank you for including that link. And those of you that are interested in housing, I'm glad you shared the calculated risk blog. That is a wonderful place to get a lot of great information generally on real estate in particular. That was one of the better finance blogs that came up at the time of the Great Recession. And then Reagan created the mass transfer of wealth to the 1%. Average wealth up, but not for the common Joes. I wouldn't agree with that because look at the increase in the bottom 50%. However, I will say that the share, when you look at the wealth inequality, and we've covered it a few times, so I agree with the point overall, is that the bottom, the top 10% own about 70. Let me see if I can get this right. Without the table in front of me, it's a little tougher. Let's just say that the bottom 50% have about 4 trillion in net worth. So bottom 50% have 4 trillion in net worth. The net worth of the United States is more like 140 or 150 trillion. So 4 out of 150 belongs to the bottom 50%. So we've got a terrible wealth inequality issue in the country. I would just say lately it's gotten better, that there is more wealth being created for that bottom group, but we have a very long way to go. So I guess, Carrie, I would agree with you. I don't know that Reagan invented it. I think you've got Robert Barron's and other people going back further, but certainly he, with the big tax cuts that helped the rich, and deregulation, sort of implementing that modern conservative template. To some extent, Carter, though, did some of the same, but Reagan was a big union buster. So yes, I mean, Republicans generally have not been the friends of the working class, even though sadly the working class is increasingly going over to them, probably economic reasons. All right, let me go into the next part here. There we go. Yeah, corporate owned more than 72% of the rentals in St. Petersburg. I mean, that's crazy. I should not allow that. All right, so let's see, how are we doing on time? Let me look here. Let's take a short break.